reduced garbage by 28 grams per capita and increased the amount of bottles gathered by 5.37 grams, which is about like 2.5.
Hi everyone, I'm Jake.
I'm Miranda. Sarah.
I'm Dylan.
Kristen.
So we decided to do our paper on recycling, the economic and behavioral considerations involved. So just going over a brief introduction on what we're going to really kind of touch on within this presentation. We kind of just have a brief history of recycling, and then we're going to discuss some of the formal economic theory and as well as some of the social theory involved too. And then we're going to evaluate some of the case studies that we saw within our research.
So to begin, we started looking at where recycling started, and we found that it started after World War I when there was a shortage in raw materials. And from there, curbside recycling began, I believe in 1974 in University City, Missouri. And it just took off from there. And from there, we moved from, it was all separated, to a combined system, which just really drove the programs nationally. To begin our paper, we looked at different methods in the past that have been successful. These three methods we saw served as a baseline for our paper. Bag system, generally more inelastic and was not nearly as successful as the price per weight, which was just much more price efficient. And then we went to a container system, which really was the most efficient as it drove peer pressure on the side of the roads on collection day. It served as a reminder to recycle when it sat in maybe like your yard or something. And it was also just the most convenient method, and it got rid of your recycled materials faster. We looked at a few case studies on the willingness to pay. And this one was a case study in Kentucky where they sent out flyers at the beginning of every month using 4 different approaches. So Guild used slogans such as like, you were 30% under national average to promote recycling. We had the no communications as a control group. Information had flyers just on facts about recycling. And the feel good was about images of like Habitat for Humanity where it showed how recycling efforts would help the community. And from the study, we found that the informational approach had the highest increase in recycling efforts, whereas the guilt approach had the least effective.
So some factors that can influence recycling habits. If you recycle at work, you are more likely to recycle at home. It's a carrying over trend. It's something you get used to, you do it more. It's quantity of disposal services. So if you have different ways of getting rid of things versus, I mean, obviously curbside is usually the easiest, but even if you can go somewhere to drop something off at a dump, or like, not a dump, but like a recycling plant, something like that, it's better. And then as people age, the demand and consumption increases, so they tend to recycle a bit more. And then grants and recycling.
And then from there, we had another participation case study that looked at how the efforts varied amongst a community. And it found that curbside was just partly, when you have curbside provided by the town, you don't know of alternative situations, so you don't tend to pay for the private costs. And they found that if it was provided, 78% of the household would use at no additional cost, but without being it provided, only 49% would use for additional cost of a private service.
Yeah, and so one of the actual pieces that we looked at was a piece by Viscusi, Huber, and Bell, and they essentially created a model for what incentivizes recycling and what really determines whether or not a household is likely to recycle or not. And what they do throughout this model is they basically weigh the warm glow benefit, which of course has been touched on beforehand, the psychological benefit of recycling, the value reduced of environmental damage, the deposit refund, and then the two things that he mostly discusses within the piece are the avoided injunctive norm costs, as well as the avoided destruction of the norm costs as well. And if all of these things outweigh the overall time cost, then a household is going to be likely to recycle. And so the two norms that he really touches upon within his piece are the descriptive norms and the injunctive norms. The descriptive norms are the actual social repercussions of not recycling. It is the enumerated repercussion from your neighbors seeing you not recycling and saying, hey, that's not right, that's not the type of community that we want to promote, this is unsustainable behavior, I'm mad. And then the injunctive norms are those that one imposes upon themselves for not recycling. Because of the fact that, let's just say you have a plastic water bottle and you're looking for somewhere to recycle it, but there's only a trash can, you're going to feel relatively negative if you end up having to throw away a plastic water bottle rather than recycling it. And so what Muscussi ends up really emphasizing within his piece is that descriptive norms that are placed on one another within a society can actually have implications for injunctive norms. So if you have a community that's fairly affluent and there's a much higher likelihood of descriptive norms having an impact, it's going to be a lot more likely that there's going to be further injunctive norms as well that a person places on themselves. And the two norms are highly correlated. And he also says that the financial incentives that are provided by way of tax cuts, subsidizations, are going to be much more effective than simply not doing anything at all. And legal regimes really do have a place in promoting recycling behavior.
Okay, so aside from the economic incentives of encouraging recycling, we also wanted to look into the behavioral incentives, what actually encourages a consumer to actually go through the recycling patterns. So there were a few psychological incentives that we came across. The first was the distortion bias. It had been mentioned previously. However, essentially the situation is the higher the entropy level, the lower value on the actual item itself. So entropy is a state of chaos of an actual item. So an example would be a person is much more likely to recycle an entire newspaper that's intact rather than a whole bunch of scrap papers that are randomly placed together, because there's a larger psychological incentive and value placed on the intact item. Another one is the identity bias. This is also psychologically encouraging to recycle these pieces. So essentially, if you go to Starbucks and they say Miranda Rainer on it, for some reason people connect a higher value to that rather than just a generic coffee cup. And statistically proven that they're more likely to recycle those goods. And moral licensing is kind of an ironic situation. So essentially, once people start recycling, they subconsciously think that it's okay to consume more because they're doing the correct environmental stewardship and they're disposing of their waste as they quote-unquote should. So they feel less guilt about consuming more products. In this situation with the moral licensing, more waste is actually being processed through both the landfill and the recycling technologies. Social and political socialization incentives are also a large factor as far as encouraging recycling behaviors. So the warm glow effect that was mentioned previously, essentially it is kind of that feel-good feeling of altruism, saying that I'm being a good environmental steward, therefore I feel good about myself. So when that is promoted in a society as being a good and admirable trait, that increases the recycling behaviors within the community. Also, perception and pressure from others. This is directly economically tied. So essentially, it goes with the sphere of environmental consciousness in relation to economics. When a very low economic community, they're more concerned about taking care of their immediate family and immediate community rather than taking care of the earth. Whereas when you have more of an income and more of a worldview, then you can actually afford both time-wise and financially wise to look outside of your immediate world and look into the greater environment. So this is how perception and pressure from others links the economic classes or the more affluent communities. So lower income areas have less of an impact as far as what their neighbors perceive them doing and the societal pressure to recycle, whereas more affluent communities are much more highly influenced by that.
So a lot of the empirical evidence we looked at had to do with unit pricing, as it seems the most effective way to get people to actually recycle is to add a cost to it, whether that's marginal cost, stuff like that. So Internationally, there's a study conducted in the Netherlands by Albert Ditchgriff and Reem Gradis. But basically what they looked at is they looked at the 4 different pricing systems throughout the municipalities in the Netherlands, where some municipalities had curbside, some just had drop-off, stuff like that. They all had some form of recycling program. But what they found is that municipalities that were looking to institute one of these already tended to produce less waste and more recyclable waste, like more recyclables. So what it is it's like we said before, and as it's been mentioned, more affluent communities that have more time to worry about things like recycling are already more likely to be recycling, and therefore any studies that look at these things, sometimes they're distorted because they're not taking into account previous recycling efforts. But the study did actually find that even in the municipalities it did look at, weight-based and bag-based systems tended to decrease waste, which is just garbage, but at the same time increased recyclable waste, which is what you're looking to do. So I mean, it's basically just looking at if you have to pay per bag, you're gonna take things that you could recycle out of the bag, put it into the recycling bin. That way you save space and you save your money. Also, some interesting. It also looked at awareness erosion, which basically is if over time did people so when it first starts, you're going to notice it more acutely, the price. But over time, they found that people were still paying very close attention to the price of the per bag or the weight base, and were not decreasing the amount of recyclables that they used, as if they're actually increasing them. And then the second study looked at in Japan. Actually, Japan has, I think when I was doing the studies, 60 or 70% of their waste is actually recyclable, but a lot of municipalities there don't actually have recycling methods or laws. So one of the things they looked at is they looked specifically at PET bottles, which is just like the type of plastic that most water bottles are made out of. And what they found was that by increasing the price of bags by about 10 yen, about 9 cents would be the comparison for us, half bottles per capita, per person per household. And it doesn't sound like a lot, but when you add it up, so you keep increasing the price, it generally just causes an increase in the amount of plastic collected. Basically, these just point out again that if you increase the cost to collecting waste, people are more likely to substitute that by removing recyclables from garbage waste and putting them into a free collection method. That way they can save money on actual garbage. Next one. And then nationally, this was a study conducted in Marietta, Georgia, which has a population of about 50,000 at the time of the study. They divided them up into 2 different groups. There was groups that had to pay per bag, so it was 75 cents a bag. And then another group that used a subscription can program, so they had to contact a company ahead of time and tell them how many cans they were going to have to be picked up and pay for that. Overall, the study showed an average of 9.19 pounds more recycled material was gathered per household, while a decreased amount of garbage waste was collected. It should be prefaced that all these studies, they do note that it's possible people could be disposing of their garbage in other ways, but then you'd have to also look at the time cost of going out of your way to just go dump your garbage somewhere or something.
Now moving to more local level, so not all of us are from Rhode Island, but we have lived here for the last 4 years, so we wanted to give a little background on recycling in Rhode Island. The University of Rhode Island and Reader's Digest in the past 2 years have done separate studies based on the cleanliness of Providence as a whole. And they scored from 1 being the cleanest city and 50 being the dirtiest. Providence got a 39 in terms of water toxins and toxins that are being polluted when people dispose of the wrong type of recycled items in the wrong sections. So that being said, currently Rhode Island has a landfill over 20,000 square feet, which is located in Johnston, which is east of Providence. The landfill people, local Rhode Island citizens, can go and deposit their recycling there or other recycled material, which is then buried underneath the soil at the landfill. So currently the state has projected that the landfill will reach capacity between 20 and 25 years from now. That would be if the rate that people are disposing of their recycling remains constant. If it fluctuates, the limit can be reach capacity a lot sooner, so they're anticipating maybe like 10 years. If that happens, that the current property can be expanded, or the state will have to look for new property to move the landfill to, and if that's not an option, the state will have to think about burning garbage, which is currently prohibited by the state of Rhode Island. So this is just a aerial view of the landfill in Johnston. So incentives for Rhode Islanders, this is really interesting, but Rhode Island is one of the lowest states to recycle in the Northeast. Currently, if you go to the landfill, you can dispose of your recycling for $32 a ton, which is $5 less than the national average. This price is kept really low through the revenue earned from commercial trash disposal in Rhode Island, which is between $56 and $75 a ton. Municipal trash is the least expensive to dispose of, so the state legislature sets the price for that. So the price has remained low for the last 15 years and can be anticipated that it will remain low in the future, which is good for Rhode Islanders and gives them an incentive to recycle. So the Rhode Island Resource Recovery Cooperation is a local cooperation. It's set in place by the state to take charge of the trash and recycling in the state of Rhode Island. It was created by the Rhode Island General Assembly in 1974 to accomplish the state jobs, but it does not depend on the state's financing. The Rhode Island Resource Recovery Cooperation accepts only Rhode Island waste, but it keeps in mind that the landfill will reach capacity within the next 20 to 25 years. So it encourages people to recycle, and it does that through education and knowledge of how to recycle and what goods you're able to recycle. So it's determined on how much you can bring to the landfill based on each town's recycling amount. So the weight of a recycling bin divided by your numerator and your refuse, which should be about 35%. In addition to your diversion rate, which is the weight of your recycling bin plus the contents, which are not all sent to the landfill, divided by your numerator plus your refuse, and that should be about 50%. So it should be about 50-35 of what you're bringing to deposit at the landfill. The state defines recyclables as what materials are included in the recycling equation, which has to do with the first equation on the top. The most important party involved in recycling is the consumer, so as long as you're getting consumers to recycling is going to continue into the future. The more people that buy products made from recycling materials, the more products we're going to be able to use in the future. So their whole mission is to focus on what can be recycled and how it can be recycled. And I thought this was kind of fun, but this is Max, the recycling man that they send to local Rhode Island schools, and he helps teach and educate children on how to recycle and what can be recycled. So that goes back to their general mission of trying to make Rhode Islanders more knowledgeable on recycling in the hopes that they'll be incentivized to recycle in the future. That's it.